Hello, I welcome you to this learning session on IFRS for SME. This session will help you to build a solid understanding in respect of IFRS for SMEs. Let's move forward towards the learning objective. After completing this session, you will have a brief understanding of the IFRS for SME, what actually it is, and how it is different from the IFRS, the full package. Along with that, you will have an understanding regarding the applicability of the IFRS for SMEs, which means who can apply this IFRS for SME or which kind of entities IFRS has been developed. So let's move on. Introduction. This is the sole standard issued by IASB. This is a sole standard issued by IASB, which means that this is the separate standard from the whole group of the IFRS. Suppose if I'm complying with IFRS consists of four items: IAS issued by IASC, IFRS, SICs, and IFRICs. So which means that either I apply the full package of the IFRS or I can either apply IFRS for SMEs subject to the applicability. The topics are divided in two sections. Unlike IFRS for SMEs contains sections for different topics. For example, IAS1 in case of the IFRS deals with the presentation of financial statement. It deals with presentation of financial statement. But when we come to IFRS for SME, it has some sections. IFRS for SMEs, it has some sections, that is from section 1 to section 6 deals with the presentation part. So which means when we comply with the IFRS full, we need to comply by IAS1. But when we are complying with IFRS for SMEs, section 1 to section 6 deals with the presentation. The third point, amendment made to the IFRS for SME. So IASB has made pervasive amendments in the old IFRS for SMEs, and basically these standards are issued in 2009. And the amendment came up in the month of 2016. So what they did is like they have made substantial change, which means around 27 sections of the IFRS for SMEs are being updated. So you need to apply the updated IFRS for the SMEs. That they gave a transition period or they gave a transition date, which means that all the accounts which are beginning on or after 1st January 2017, they require to apply this amendments. So accounting period beginning on or after 1st January 2017 are required to make themselves complied with the amendments to the IFRS for SME. Let's move forward towards the applicability of IFRS for SMEs. So IFRS for SME can only be applied by small and medium size entities. That's the catch, which means it can only be applied by SMEs. That's why we are calling it again and again IFRS for SME. It can only be applied by small and medium enterprise. Now IFRS for all SMEs defined what do you mean by SMEs. IFRS for SME defines what do you mean by SMEs. So SME means entity that does not have any public accountability and it's an and issues general purpose financial statements. We will discuss what's this and what's public accountability is. So first understand IFRS for SMEs are applicable for SMEs only. And SME means entities that does not have public accountability and those issues general purpose financial statements. So now the main point is disclosures. When we read the IFRS and when we read the IFRS for the SME, the main difference is the disclosure. So if we are covered by more people, which means if we are publicly accountable, so we need to provide the stakeholders with sufficient information, sufficient data, so that they can make their own judgment or they can check their valuations and all those data. So regular information and detailed information is required in case the entities comply in case the entity is publicly accountable. Now let's move into what do you mean by public accountability. If any of the criteria are met, this is or. This is and this is or, which means if you have any debt and equity instrument that are being listed or in the process of listing, or you hold any asset in the fiduciary capacity. So there are 3 points that we will discuss. One means public accountability. We discussed it here, which means if the entity is having any debt or the equity instrument are listed in any exchange or in the process of listing, or if they hold assets in the fiduciary capacity. The second thing we will discuss what do you mean by general purpose financial statement. And third thing we will discuss about fiduciary capacity. Now, what do you mean by general purpose financial statement? General purpose financial statements are available to a broader level of stakeholders, which means these are for those stakeholders who cannot demand separate report. This is the general report on the financial performance of the entity, which means is for the general purpose, which is available to a broad level of stakeholders or those people who cannot demand separate financials statements or any other report. There has to be some standard to be maintained or some level of disclosure to be required. That's why we have this standard. Fiduciary capacity includes banks, insurance, or mutual funds because even though they are not listed, but they raise money from the public, or the public is very much reliant on these people. Because, for example, banks, even if a bank is not listed, but people do have their deposits in the bank in the form of savings account, fixed deposits. So, which means that even though it's not listed, but it should have the detailed disclosure. So, I just discussed regarding the disclosures. So, they should provide a detailed disclosures to their stakeholders. That's why they put into this clause, which means, again, IFRS for SME means it is applicable for the SMEs, those who do not have public accountability and they issue general purpose. So, which means IFRS for SME is applicable for general purpose financial statements. If an entity is unable to satisfy both the criteria that we discussed earlier, then in such a case they cannot claim the compliance with the IFRS for SME. Even if in certain jurisdiction public accountable companies are allowed to use IFRS per SME, but they are still cannot claim the compliance. Even if your jurisdiction allows you to have public accountability, even if they allow, but still you cannot claim the compliance if you are publicly accountable, which means IFRS for SMEs is only applicable for the entities which do not have any public accountability and for the general purpose financial statements. In respect of separate financial statement, a parent is required to check its own status in its separate financial statement. I'm not talking about the consolidation, I'm talking about the separate financial statements, about its sole activities rather than looking from the perspective of the entire group. Now think about it. Suppose parent, this is not doing any kind of public activity, and this is preparing financial statement at it is preparing general purpose financial statement, but it is having some subsidiary which is doing business in respect of bank, or even it is listed, then in such a case the parent can opt for the IFRS for SMA because this is IFRS for SMA because first of all it is not publicly accountable in its own business and it is preparing general purpose financial statement, which means the parent can claim the compliance with the IFRS for SME even if its subsidiary is listed, but it is applicable in only in case of separate financial statements, not in case of consolidation. In case of consolidation, they cannot apply because in consolidation we are thinking as one single entity. And the same applies to a subsidiary, even if the entire group is applying full IFRS, the subsidiary is having the liberty to apply IFRS for SME. So which means that if there is a parent which is applying full IFRS, and it is having one subsidiary which is not publicly accountable, no publicly accountability, and it's preparing general purpose financial statement, then in such a case it can apply IFRS for SMEs in its own accounts. So this is a brief understanding on the introduction and the applicability of IFRS for SME. I hope you to see you in the next lecture. Thank you.